Thank you, Chair. So the audit has proceeded as we discussed at the last meeting. The report hasn't been finalised, which is why it's not here. But the draft report has been issued to management, and we're just waiting for comments to come back. We should be presenting that report at the next meeting for sure. Sorry about that.
Same point, there seems to be some discrepancy on, on what is say in the minutes on the same issue. On page 3, the acquisition and disposal assets audit was scheduled to be presented to the committee at the next meeting. And then on the bottom says the auditing of the acquisitions and disposal of assets would be a piece of work that the head of audit and risk management proposed to look at in the upcoming municipal year. Is there some conflict, some confusion here? Can you clarify that point?
Thank you, Chair. So at the last meeting, there was a bit of a discussion around our governance for acquisitions and disposals of assets. So what was agreed was that we would carry out the follow-up piece of work in relation to the previous audits that have been done. And that's the point that Councillor Rossetti has raised quite rightly. But in addition to that, the committee asked me to consider whether it was appropriate to carry out a fresh audit in light of the governance issues that have been highlighted previously, which I accepted. So in addition to that, there is an audit on the plan for this year to review the acquisitions and disposals once more, because I think we recognise that the governance is being improved, but we're on a journey, and essentially what this follow-up and the fresh audit will try to do is help us see where we are at in terms of those governance processes that we want to establish.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
In terms of the comments you've made, I just, for the benefit of the committee, do you, as the chair, clear the minutes before they are published? Because it's a bit of a concern that you're asking questions of minutes that you chaired. So I think it probably will be better for future if that is not done, for you to clear them before. Yeah.
I was not the chair or member of the committee when this things happen. Yeah, that is all. Yeah, that's the point. It's just that I do need to ask, the questions in public on certain of the issues. Yeah, but as I say, if it would be different if for the next meeting, or the whole thing. Just I wanted to clarify one point, if you don't mind. But 10 section used as an example, there are some references to things that will be done soon or expected to be done. And I was wondering whether these things have been done. For example, about the outstanding items that were reported there on the audit program, the valuation of infrastructure assets and things like this. And then even further down about the progress with the pension fund auditing. These things, I don't see them on the agenda, and they are here promised as things that are going to be resolved very soon. There any update? Anybody can explain what's happening? Have they happened, these things?
Sorry, let me use this opportunity to introduce myself now. My name is Casey Kegu. I'm the Chief Accountant of the Borough. Here, on your question, I think I will touch on most of those issues as part of my updates very soon. Yeah.
The same on both of those, and the pension fund.
Yes, we have the head of pensions here. So
yeah, because here it says that they will be resolved by the next meeting.
I'm resolved shouldn't be the right word, but I think the updates will highlight exactly where we are and what is happening at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Then, all right. So, can I just say that nobody has got any objections to the accuracy of the minutes otherwise, isn't it? Yeah. So we agree the minutes as a true record. Okay. And there aren't any other matters arising that anybody wants to raise, yeah? Charles, did you want to raise any? No, sorry. I thought you might. Statement of accounts, 21-22. Verbal update. Before you continue, why couldn't it be written as well? Please cover in your introduction.
Thank you, Chair. Usually we come to this committee at this time of the year with a draft statement of account. So we are meant to present the draft statement of account for 2021-22 financial year. But I'm just going to give a verbal update on where we are with the draft statement of accounts. In summary, the draft statement of account is not ready. That's why we haven't brought it to this committee at this stage. We will all, or we may be aware that it is a requirement by the Accounts and Audit Regulation that every local authority is required to prepare their draft accounts by the 31st of May every year. But since COVID, what has happened is that that date has been extended to 1st of August every year. But last year, both the deadline for the draft statement of accounts and the 30th of September deadline for the signed accounts, we met the deadline for 1st of August last year, but we didn't start the audits of 2021-22 even after 31st of September. It started very late. And I want to say that we're not the only borough in that. As at 30th of September last year, it was about 9% of boroughs that actually completed their accounts last year. So in the whole country, 9%. So it was a global issue. It was a nationwide issue that we all know about. So our audit started late. And as a result of it, we are still in the audit of 2021 accounts. So as you will know, that will definitely have a knock-on effect on the draft account for 2021-22. And again, there was another factor which meant that even if we had finished the audit of 2020-21 account, we wouldn't have signed off the accounts. Is the issue the chair mentioned around infrastructural assets, the technical accounting issue that came up during the year. And since then, CIFA has been looking into ways to, work around that issue to ensure that even the boroughs that have finished their 2020-21 accounts will be able to sign off. As at present, none of them are signing off the accounts of 2020-21. So these are issues that has kept us still in 2020-21 audits. So the knock-on effect is that we are still doing 2021 audit at the same time doing 2021-22 draft accounts. So which meant that we are not able to turn the 2021-22 draft account around by 1st of August. Because we also have to roll over data from 2020-21 into 2021-22, because you close that year, sign it off, roll over data. But helpfully, we reached an agreement with our external auditors 2 weeks ago on a workaround with that so that we can roll over the data. But as you know, we reached the agreement 2 weeks ago. There's always work. It's not just roll over data. There's a lot of series of work that has to be done before we conclude the account, which is what we are doing right now. And from what we've seen, if we push ourselves to produce the draft by the 1st of August, obviously there will be a lot of errors because we need to do a lot of reviews, reconciliations, and checks to make sure that the accounts are in good shape. So as a result of that, the draft accounts will not be published by 1st of August this year. And I just want to point out that this is the first time we've been in this position and that we are not alone in this position. It's not a position we want to be in. But I mean, a lot of factors, external factors have taken this off our hands. So that is where we are, but we're working very hard to see that we produce a draft account by the end of August that is up to the standard that we've been producing before.
Thanks, Casey. We've got with us online, actually, Mr. Eagle, from our external auditor. as well, who can I first of all thank you for joining us and welcome. And I hope we'll be working through the year quite well on all those issues. Would you like to make some comments yourself on what you heard and what the situation is? Thank you.
And I'm very grateful. Thank you very much, Chairman. Just to echo Casey's points about the national position on audits, my understanding is that there are in excess of 40% of councils, and also not just London Boroughs, councils nationally, where the opinions are awaited, and also outstanding audits from previous years. So I know there are certainly London Boroughs from 1920 audits which are still not signed off. They're actually all captured by this issue relating to infrastructure that Casey mentioned. And just to sort of, I suppose, manage expectations in terms of timing, CIPFA, who are the accountancy body responsible for the code, and CIPFA LASAC, which is the committee, including the Scottish side of things, which develops the code of accounting practice, have been trying to deal with the issue relating to infrastructure assets for some time, since it was first raised back in February this year. The issue is that because of the way that infrastructure assets are accounted for and recorded, that it's not possible to I suppose undertake proper accounting practice when assets are removed from use. So what we would normally do for fixed assets is, if they stop being used, we write out the costs, we write out the accumulated depreciation and any net impact of that. But because of the way infrastructure is accounted for on a geographical project by project basis, that is not possible, and therefore we can't comply with the current code. So CIPFA is trying to undertake an exercise to change that code to address the particular issue. There was a consultation that finished in mid-June, the results of which have been discussed at various different sort of groups. Unfortunately, the result has not come out with one that's currently yet mutually acceptable. There may be need for government intervention in terms of statutory override, but the position is still being discussed. Originally, we had anticipated that timetable to respond to the consultation to give us an answer by mid to late July. That's not going to be the case anymore, but we don't yet have a revised timeline, but it could be a few more months before we get that position. Currently, all auditors, so BDO and all the other firms involved, have paused the issue of opinions. So we and you are all in the same sort of boat, and we cannot really issue an opinion until that position has been clarified. It may still be necessary to issue a specific qualification on the 2021 accounts for Haringey if we cannot get a solution in the short term, but that position is being discussed, and clearly we would all rather avoid having that sort of situation. We don't want that door opened. So we're keeping in touch with the finance team on what's going on and what we might or might not need to do with that. But at the moment, things are on hold in terms of that issue for this year's audit. So what Casey's describing in terms of pausing the 2021-22 accounts is absolutely correct, because there is still some uncertainty about what information would need to be included in respect of infrastructure. And therefore, it's quite hard for a chief financial officer to sign those off as being true and fair when there's still that degree of uncertainty. So I don't really have any more to add, just to say that we will be re-engaging with the audit later in the summertime once things have become a bit more clear. But the issue is not Haringey's alone, it is a national one.
Thank you very much for that. Now, just clarify something before I open it to questions and comments. Your advice to us as our external auditor to our committee is, it is reasonable that we are in the state we are at this moment in time, and is there some advice to us that what we could do more or what could have done more in order to I appreciate that a lot of local authorities and other bodies are in the same situation and there are external factors, but just any advice that you've got, or are we okay as a committee to relax a bit about that?
Yeah, you're doing pretty much what everybody else is doing. I mean, we've heard rumours that there may be authorities somewhere in the country that have records that may enable them to be compliant with the current code, but we have yet to identify exactly who they are. So I think they are rumours rather than sort of a reality. But that was again something that's been discussed. Just for information, I'm part of the for LASEC Task and Finish group, which is dealing with this particular issue. So, unfortunately, I can't talk about the specifics of the group's discussion because they're confidential. But just to say, there's a significant amount of work that's going into that process. And from what I've seen and heard, you're doing pretty much what everybody else is doing. It's just that the bar and the judgment factor has changed this year, and so therefore we're all in the boat of saying, well, actually, there are things we need to do differently to be able to comply, or we need to change the code so we're complying with something different. So my advice to you is, you're not doing it different to other people. You're still talking to us about what's going on. Your position in respect of the draft accounts is sensible and prudent, and I think no more at this stage.
Thank you very much. Can I just open it to any questions or comments members may have? Yeah. Oh, can I just if you introduce yourself and everybody else did, because it's our first meeting and it's public, etc., as well as Erdal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to go ahead?
Should I?
Yeah. Kausika first. If you introduce yourself.
I'm Councillor Kaushika. I mean, I'm so sorry I missed the first bit of it. The question I wanted to ask was, could we have done anything in the last year or so to foresee all these delays and stuff, or all the circumstances we find ourselves in? Because it feels this is quite an important moment, and feels as if not getting it right might not be. We should have. Yeah. I think we should have been able to foresee it.
Yeah, I think the straight and honest answer is I don't think there's anything you could have done differently, because what you were doing in terms of the way you're accounting for infrastructure assets is pretty much the same that everybody else is doing. There have just been sort of various other factors, partly to do with audit regulation, partly to do with just the nature of issues that are evolving, partly to do with scrutiny and penalties on auditors that have given rise to looking at this issue with a slightly different perspective. And unfortunately, that came out in February this year, and only at that point were we clear that pretty much all authorities were not accounting for infrastructure assets in the way that would be necessary to ensure compliance with the code of accounting practice. So I don't think you could have done anything different. I think it's sort of it's come out of the left field for pretty much everyone.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear any of that. I could see hands moving, but not any sound.
I was just going to ask if there was anything that other local authorities in a better place than us have done something differently. I'm just wondering why some authorities are in a poor state and others are not so.
I don't think anyone's in a better or poorer state than anybody else, because our understanding from inquiries of all the authorities that we work with who hold infrastructure assets is that you are all pretty much accounting for them in the same sort of way. You all deal with the records and the way of dealing with things in pretty much the same sort of way. So I absolutely am not saying that Haringey is particularly better or worse than anybody. It's just an issue that is common to all the infrastructure holding assets, infrastructure asset holding authorities, and we're having to deal with that particular point. So I'm not applying sort of criticism in any way of the way that Haringey has dealt with this.
Any other comments? Yeah, Anna.
So from your briefing, we understand that the 1st August deadline is going to be missed. Are you putting any measures in place to make sure that the subsequent deadline for the following year will not be missed as well? Because it seems from your briefing that missing one deadline is having then a knock-on effect on another deadline.
Yes, we have actually been reviewing events, as they're happening, and we've put a lot of measures. We've had several meetings trying to ensure that the current financial year, this wouldn't happen. That's 2022-23. But we'll do all we can. But if we have some external factors like the one that arose February this year come up again, we're not envisaging any, or maybe this one lingers because we thought this issue would have been resolved by now, but it's still lingering. We're in July ending now. We thought this issue would have been resolved months ago. Then it takes things out of our hands. But everything possible that we can do within the team, we are doing, and we are constantly liaising with other boroughs to know exactly what approach are they taking, what are they doing. So we're talking to each other, on this. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Eldridge?
So in essence, there's no real clear formula for a situation like this. It's ad hoc, and you as you go on. Is that correct?
The valuations, yeah? Yeah.
So was that a question to me?
Yeah. Is there
sorry.
any resolution about this issue?
I think this particular issue is very much sort of an ad hoc, and we have to respond to it because the way that things have been accounted for in terms of infrastructure assets has been going on for many years. So it's not a new position. It's just that this has been looked at with a different perspective on. So I don't think there's anything you necessarily could have done to have second guess this particular issue.
Well, can I thank everybody? Can I say it's not very happy situation to be, but I've heard the thing enough, we've heard enough. My opinion is that it is one of those things. And I say that because on another body, I am the North London Waste Authority. It is exactly the same story. Exactly the same story. Had the same discussion there. And yesterday I was in a meeting of chairs of audit committees of London. There were about a dozen. Every single one of them was saying the same story exactly. So I don't think that we can blame ourselves at the moment, especially since the authority has had a good record before the pandemic. There are a number of problems. There is the issue of the valuations. There are also issues of availability of auditors, especially after the COVID pandemic and the Brexit, that have restricted the access to outside the country auditors that usually various companies and various auditing sections have been using, etc. Let's hope that it will be resolved very soon. But if we agree all of it, let's note the verbal report on the whole thing and hope to have a better news at the next meeting. Agreed? Yeah, thank you. The next item on the agenda is the Treasury Management Outturn for the year 21-22. That will be introduced by Tim Pofu. Please introduce yourself, Tim, although some of the councillors were talking to you before, not everybody was there.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Mpofu. I'm the head of pensions and treasury here at Haringey. The report that will be presenting to the committee this evening is the Treasury Management Outturn report for 2021-2022. So the Chartered Institute of Public Finance, CIPFA, they have a treasury management strategy which the council has adopted and governs how we manage our treasury activity here at Haringey. So as part of that requirement, we are supposed to bring this paper to the corporate committee twice a year. We actually bring it 4 times a year, but this forms part of that requirement as the final update on the year, on the previous financial year. Just for members to note, the activities that are contained in this report are based on the Treasury Management Strategy that was approved on the 1st of March 2021. In terms of the report itself, the bulk of the report or the performance that's been reported is in Appendix 1, which is from page 11. The economic background, which has been provided by the Council's Treasury Management Advisor, Alan Close, provides an economic summary of the performance over the previous financial year. So members will note that the key change is the raising concerns about inflation and also the expected increase in interest rates going forward. In terms of the rest of the report, the key things to highlight to members is just in terms of the borrowing strategy last year, just to bring to members' attention that the total portfolio of borrowing was 700 million. 120 million of new long-term borrowing was undertaken by the council last year, and also 16.5 million matured during the course of the year. From an investment perspective, the investments increased from 17 million to 71 million. The main reason for that was towards the end of March, we received quite a substantial amount of government grants. And on top of that, we also undertook some additional borrowing just to take advantage of the lower rates, given that rates were expected to increase into the new year. The final area that I'd like to bring to members' attention is the Treasury Management Indicators, which is contained from section 6.4 onwards, just to alert members that all the activities that was undertaken by the Treasury Management team was in line with the approved indicators from the previous strategy. So with that, Chair, I'm happy to open it up to questions if members have any.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, thanks to it's Councillor Daldogan here. So my question is that depending on the interest rates are going up dramatically for the since last couple of months, how would that will impact in terms of the investment and the borrowing? What are the interest rates? Does it have impact on that, of the borrowing, of the interest? Is it fixed? Is it variable rate? So could you please provide some more information on that, please? Thanks.
Yes, so the long-term portfolio, the long-term borrowing portfolio at the moment is fixed. There are no variable rates. So the existing loan portfolio would not be impacted by any increase in interest rates. However, any new interest rate any new loans that we'll have to take will be at a higher rate. Just to remind members, and this might be one that to feedback at a future meeting, when we set the last strategy, we actually assumed that rates would be around 3.5%. At the moment, the PWB is around 3.2% for 50-year money. So if we were to take money at that level, we'll still be below our budget. Another thing, which was the advantage of us taking so much borrowing last year, is we've managed to reduce that borrowing because last year rates were at a historically lower level. So we anticipate that that gives us some opportunity to buffer the storm. And there are also views in the markets that there might be a recession coming and banks might have to start reducing that cost, at which point it will be a good opportunity for us to look at taking any further borrowing.
Any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Well, I think the points we've got to note here is the overall picture as it is. The report is assuring us that during that year, everything held in the strategy as we had it for all the challenges that happened during that particular year. Secondly, that our overall borrowing requirements, etc., have gone up according to plan, and the interest rates have been handled and other things through various means, so there's nothing to worry there. And finally, on the section 6, there are the various sort of like specific performance indicators or do's and don'ts that they are within our strategy, and I note that they're all ticked as which means that it seems that it has been a satisfactory year overall, despite all the challenges, etc. So, without any further ado, we have to, I think, note the report. That agreed? Agreed. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim. The next item we've got is the update on from the head of audit and risk management. Minesh, if you introduce yourself first here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Minesh Jani. I'm the head of audit and risk management, and I've got a few papers, but I'll start with the annual report, which is really the summary of the work that the internal audit team has done for the last financial year. If I may just take a few minutes to introduce the paper and the appendices, and then take any questions after that, if that's okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Right, let me get a big one. Great. Okay, so the purpose of the annual report that I bring to you is to summarize the work of the internal audit team and the fraud team. And members really need to note the highlights that I give, and please ask any questions you have off the back of that. In terms of the background, the committee's terms of reference require the committee to consider my annual report so that it has the oversight of the assurances that internal audit is providing, and also identify the gaps in assurances from the work of audit. I'm also under an obligation with the public sector internal audit standards. If I can just pause for 1 second and explain what that is. These are professional standards to which all heads of audits have to abide, where they practice internal audit in the public sector. So where I practice internal audit in our local authority, I have to abide by these standards. And that's important because the standards require me to do a number of things, but 3 in particular. I have to present to you a summary of my work. I have to give an overall opinion of what I think is in terms of, the overall opinion on the internal control environment in the authority. And I have to confirm to you whether the work of internal audit conforms to those public sector standards. And I'll pick up each of those in a minute. The report's actually made up of 5 parts. What I've tried to do here is present the report such that it's clear what each element of the report is trying to show. And I'll just mention a few highlights from that in a minute too. If I address the first element of the appendix, and that's Appendix A, that is actually the substantial report. And what that does is it summarizes the work of all the audits. But in addition to that, it sets out what the role of audit is as a way of background, the purpose of the assurance regime, and my overall opinion. For the opinion to be formed, I have to make sure that there is sufficient work carried out by the auditors, and that the overall work is of adequate level to give a meaningful opinion. So when I say that this is my opinion, it's actually based on some substance. What I'd like to highlight to you is that in overall terms, I've assigned an adequate level of assurance for last year's work. And that's based on 54 pieces of audits that were done. We planned to do 56. There were 2 that we couldn't finish. There were some audits which were not assigned a level of assurance that we were satisfied with. If I can just say what they were. I think I've actually at paragraph 3.9, I've identified the specific issues, but I'll just mention them here as well. So the audits around mental health assessment, elective home education, deprivation of liberty, payroll, recruitment of temporary agency workers, building compliance, the ICO accountability framework, cybersecurity, the use and control of CCTV, and contract management, they were all assigned limited assurance. And one area, the New River Leisure Centre, was assigned nil assurance. So those were the areas where the levels of assurance were not of a satisfactory nature. One of the other things I did was to try to sort of get to the root cause. What was it that meant the assurances were not of a satisfactory level? And I think there are some trends which I've identified, and these are important because fixing these areas will help us get a higher level of assurance in future. So the key issues I noted were the quality of record keeping, adequacy of audit trails to support what is or is not being done, the level of supervision and management information that's available, the need for up-to-date policies, strategies and procedures. There were some that were out of date, and the level of oversight and compliance with internal controls. That last one is perhaps a little bit understandable because of the impact of COVID, I think, where in the past paper arrangements could not be operated in the way that they'd been planned for, because COVID didn't just allow that. I'll point to 2 or 3 key areas of the report which I think you might find helpful. At paragraph 4.5, there is a table there, it's a long table, that sets out all the audits that were done. And there's a summary of that at table 2 on page 33. And then if I just highlight tables 3 and 4, those help analyze the work that was done by the levels of assurance assigned and the recommendations that were raised. Attached to the report are further appendices. I think, you know what, let me just pause there before I go into those appendices and just take any questions.
Thanks, Minesh. So I was at the corporate committee last year, and my question is more about the cybersecurity. So last time it was limited assurances. This year it's limited assurances. I think that's alarming, because if our servers are hacked, that means that many residents' data is gone. To recover that means months. So I think that there needs to be a concentration on that, to look into that cybersecurity in particular. So I don't know if you recall that when Hackney Council had a cyber attack, it took them 4 months to recover the data back, and that had enormous impact on residents. So I'm just bringing this up to your attention. So it's something that needs looking into sooner than later.
To respond.
Thank you, Chair. I recall that conversation, and you are absolutely right. We've been talking to Mazars about their findings. Mazars provide internal audit services to us. One of their comments is that if we get someone who's really determined to, not just for us, any organization, if the hacker is really determined, they can inflict damage. And what's really important is that we are prepared and forearmed to deal with anything that happens like that. Now, that's an area where we haven't really done enough work. And as you quite rightly say, we do need to prioritize that and get that in place sooner rather than later. The final report for cyber has been issued, and sharing your sentiments, it is very explicit in making management respond to the need to manage our key risks as quickly as possible. And we will take a sort of a firm line in terms of making sure the agreed recommendations are implemented.
Excuse my ignorance. Never done this before.
Introduce yourself, everybody else.
Hi, yeah, I'm Councillor Mary Mason, and I'm a new councillor for Bounce Green. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to know a bit more about, and it might be coming from ignorance, but it would be great to know. So the first one was, in terms of outcomes for 21-22, there were some areas that were not adequate, which I was very concerned about. Mental health assessments, elective home education, deprivation of liberty. I'm sure there's lots of other things unpacked in there, but I am particularly focusing on those areas. And I wanted to know, I couldn't track them over to changes to plan. And I'm assuming when you have an outcome which isn't adequate within a 1-year plan, that you track that over into the next plan. So could you just reassure me that there is a plan for bringing those areas into adequacy, at least, and hopefully more than that? I've got another quick question on top of that, which is that in 4.1, you ensure emerging risks during the year could be adequately reviewed. And I'm aware in Bounds Green that issues that have been raised there about fire, particular concerns around the latest weather, but also that there have been a number of small fires that people have been concerned about. And I just wondered what you had done about that and whether that had been named as an emerging risk and how that was being planned for. Across the borough, of course, because it's obviously not just Bounds Green.
Thank you. So coming to your first question, which is around assurances. The role of audit is to independently appraise operations of the council and to report back to management the status of the control environment in how those areas are being managed. We assign one of 4 levels of assurance: substantial, adequate, limited, or nil. And you're quite right to say that where a system is assigned a limited assurance or a nil assurance, that needs to be rectified. I don't expect all our systems to be at the higher end of substantial or adequate. Clearly, there'll be times when that isn't going to happen. And within Haringey, what happens is that there is a process that I go through between December and February, where I develop the internal audit plan. So these areas were identified as part of the original plan last year, and they were audited as part of that plan. Now, a key part of that planning process is to talk to the appropriate directors and assistant directors to try to understand where the risks are, i.e. where is it they feel some form of assurance is required or some attention may be needed, which is a welcome opportunity for people to highlight where they think there may be matters that audit could examine. In this instance, the director identified these areas as ones that niggled her, worried her, and she was right to be so. The key thing, though, is that having identified the issues, those matters are put right sooner rather than later. So in the first instance, we would want there to be good internal control, governance of all our operations. But if that's not the case, having identified the issues, we should be looking to put them right as soon as possible. We check on the status of those after about 6 months of the final report being issued, and we determine whether the recommendations which identify the risks have been implemented so that the risks are now closed off. Having done that, we can then be satisfied that the operations are being well managed. So that's essentially the process. So we will be looking at those areas again. You raise a really interesting point about that in your second question about fire. So when I say that we examine areas of audits where we're looking to provide assurance, that's the purpose of internal audit. To a large extent, that is based on the risk analysis that we do. Now, fire risks are those risks for which we are not, Haringey Council is not necessarily the only body that's responsible. I guess there is cross interest in various parts of public sector organisations, sort of the fire and the like, the fire brigade, I mean. And I think there's something about how we raise or discuss those matters with them to help us understand what the risk is for us and our risk appetite to that.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted, because when I read through this. Maybe sometimes you can't see the wood through the trees, but you've highlighted these areas where that were not adequate. What I'm sort of looking for is where's the improvement plan, and who's responsible for that? Does this go to the corporate management board or SLT, whatever they call it now? A director's held responsible? Is there a time frame for putting these things in order? Because it's all great highlighting all of this, but actually the other side of it, which isn't your responsibility, is actually tackling it and making sure when we get next year's report, you know, where we know that there's been sort of significant improvement. The other point I wanted to raise was you raised in 3.11 an issue around governance relating to the insourcing of homes for Haringey and health and safety, and I just wanted to, if you could expand on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor. And there is a lot of reporting of the work that we do. So what happens is that when an assignment is finished and finalised, the report will be issued to the Chief Exec, to the Director, and all the line management up to the Head of Service. Within the report, there is an action plan that sets out what has to be done going forward, the timescales, and why do we need to do that, i.e. what the risk is that we're trying to manage. And that's for all audit reports, irrespective of the assurances that we give. In my mind, I expect to find things which are not perfect all the time. That's just the nature of the beast. But like I say, the key thing with this is that once the report has been issued to management, really for management to quickly act on these matters so that we close off the risks which exist. One point I should raise is that when we decide what the risks are, these are not just risks that have been identified by the auditors. There is a lot of discussion that takes place between the auditors and management to help decipher what the true nature of the risk is. Just to give you an example, the auditors will issue a draft report and they will identify within that what they think the risks are for management comment. If management feel that, you know what, you've over-egged this risk, or actually you're probably right, or you've under-egged it, whichever way, they have the opportunity to raise that matter with the auditors for that discussion to take place so that we are crystal clear about what the risk actually is before the report's finalised. The reason I sort of mention that and sort of labour on that is because at that point, we all agree that there is a risk and it's a risk that we want to try to manage. So that.
Yeah, please.
Do we get a report back then here on that process? And two, we've got a new chief executive. Maybe the chair could ask him if he's happy with the current processes. Obviously, he's had experience elsewhere. It might be a good opportunity to check in with a different person in charge. Thanks.
So the chief exec wants assurances himself that the risks that have been identified are being closed off. So there is a reporting function to the statutory officers group where you have the chief exec, the director of finance and the monitoring officer to identify the nature of the risk and how many of those risks still remain open. So there is a mechanism for that to be picked up through that group. And I report when I give an update to this meeting, I have a table which sets out where what the number of recommendations are, what level of recommendations, and the status of those that have been implemented or not. If they haven't been implemented, I highlight where those recommendations aren't implemented. Yes.
Yes, I've got two questions for you, please. Changes to plan on page 14, page 30, but page 14 of the report. And it says child protection cases deferred to 2022, 2023. And it also says early help care plans deferred. Now, I've got concerns about that because The Ofsted report wasn't great when it was published. I have a SEND child, and I myself was not happy with the performance of the council. Equally, child protection cases, as we've seen in Haringey, have not also been great. I would have believed that there would have been a heightened priority to ensure that there was audits, because an audit trail provides you very quickly with helicopter vision about what is going on, and you can circumvent things quite quickly. I do not think that this is right or correct, considering the current climate and the narrative that is put out there about Haringey, that these two audits are deferred.
I think your risk assessment is correct. And that's my risk assessment too. So even though the audits were put back, actually they've started and they are at draft report stage now. So I'll be bringing I'll be bringing the findings from those two pieces to the next meeting.
Thank you.
Ask about how we display the reports and wondered if it should have the name of the department and the director in place, because otherwise it seems as if we're avoiding who's accountable for these failures. And it just seems to me the way it's set out at the moment doesn't help that matter, and it doesn't help us with discussions. And for me, it just doesn't help me at all. So I think it would be helpful to have the name of the department against the issue that we're talking about. And also, I think it's not about blame, but it is about blame as well at the same time, because actually for something like child protection, it sits somewhere quite important, and it's quite important to us. And CCTV, for example, raised by Councillor Dogan, I thought that was an incredibly important point, and had he not raised it, I wouldn't have got it in the same way. So I think there are some very important things. The other thing for me was the thing about repairs and homes for Haringey, and it says unresponsive repairs. I have no idea what the other repairs are called, but it seems to me it's a real mess, and we've been complaining about the state of repairs at homes for Haringey for now going on for 2 to 3 years, if not more, because all that COVID period there was no repairs done whatsoever, and the backlog is enormous. So from my perspective, there are quite a few things in here which are quite serious. And it would be helpful not to wait for another year to get things back. Actually, I would prefer it if we aim at having reports back, not necessarily every quarter, but at least every 6 months, because otherwise we're waiting, and then we're waiting for another failing, as it were, another not working well kind of approach, and we're getting no progress. And at least if we were saying that we want progress, they will be heading towards something to bring back to us. But I think the way it's set out is not helpful at all at the moment, because you'd have to really dig through it and understand departments before you can really put the right department against the right issue. So I think if that needs to be sorted, please.
Of course, I don't want us to run out of time. Would it be all right, Mines, if I take the other 2 questions as well from the people, and you deal with all of them together? Yeah, Alessandra was first, and then it was you, Charles. Yeah, Alessandra.
On the brief, and I'm sure that Nina is expecting this. So I want to stress my serious and management of the issue about this 2021 was and I appreciate this is pending to at what stage what they are, at what stage they are, they're still being thought about, are they in place, they will be expensive, and we are almost 3 years since such a first raised. So third question is, can we please have those put back in an audit plan, and that seems to already have known the committee about what that is pending control, what is exactly that the services to manage this, and also how we managing the risk in the Because if there is no audit, we know that there is something is coming pending, and this is still a risk, and there is still concern of the fundamental. Thanks.
I think Charles was okay. Yeah, all right.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, the point about the name of the department, the director and the like, I think the missing piece there is the visibility of the audit plan for this year. So what I think I'll do is at the next meeting, I'll bring a copy of the audit plan. The audit plan customarily gets approved at the start of the year, which would have been March for this committee. And I'm conscious that we've got a lot of new members who haven't had sight of that audit plan. So I'll circulate that plan, but there is also some updates to the plan. So I'll bring an updated plan to the September meeting, which picks up your point, Councillor, because it clearly identifies by department where the audits actually sit. So then I think once you see that, that makes it easier to then follow through to the annual report. That's helpful. That's helpful. The point about Homes for Haringey and the unresponsive, sorry, the responsive audits, responsive repairs audit. So I've attached an appendix, which I don't usually have, which summarizes the work that we did for Homes for Haringey last year. And that's in recognition of the fact that those functions have now become council operations. So I think it's appropriate for this committee to be aware of the issues that have been raised in the audit work that we did last year, one of which is around the responsive repairs. The other bit of repairs is the planned repairs. So that's the distinction. So for unresponsive repairs, we've assigned that limited assurance as well. There are a number of issues which we have raised, and like all the other issues that we've spoken about, those will also be followed up as part of the council's regime and reported back. Yes. I hear your frustration. I haven't lost sight of procurement, contract management, contract letting either. If I may suggest that perhaps we invite the head of procurement to come to our next meeting and give an update on the status of those recommendations. I'm aware of a lot of activity that's been happening, but I think it'd be useful for this committee to hear that directly from the head of procurement. Just to reassure Councillor Rossetti, it is on the plan for this year again. Yeah, the only reason, sorry, I don't want to labour the point. The reason it was removed last year was because I knew that there wasn't any point in doing that audit because insufficient progress had been made to address the issues that had been raised before. And I was aware that management were planning to put that right. But I think perhaps it'd be helpful just to get that from the head of procurement.
Just a very quick request for clarification on section 3.12, which relates to your audit of Haringey schools. You say that one of the themes that arose is governors' DBS evidence. Could you explain what this is? Is the issue that governors and local schools don't have DBS clearance, and what are the implications of this?
Thank you. Actually, perhaps I should just start by saying that the assurances that we've been giving to schools for the last 2 years have been a lot better than they were previously. So I'm really pleased that the cohort of schools that we've audited all seem to be showing a good level of assurance. But just as we do with the audit work for the council, we also look at the school's audit program and try to determine where it is that the common areas of risk materialize. And one of those is around checking for DBS clearances. So when the auditors go in, one of the things they would ask for is evidence to show that the appropriate checks have been made, and where they can't get that, they will raise those issues. That is raised perhaps more frequently than we would like, and so that's an area where we would like to see an improvement. The matters that I'm highlighting here have been reported to the schools forum as well. So the intention is the schools forum network will so pass that message on to all the schools so that that element improves going forward.
Before you go to the next session, let me just try to summarize a bit of these things, because I think I found interesting that you raised a number of systemic issues about information record keeping, audit trails, and follow up of the results, whether they've been implemented and so on, and how well organized, and other members raised similar issues. So I do think that that is a message we've got to take from your report, actually, at this moment in time, Ines. We have discussed, and I think hopefully for the next meeting, we will have an updated register of all the audits that have happened the last 3 or 5 years, depending on what the appropriate is, with progress and the access to the full report for any member who wants to, and discussing it. And if necessary, we can have a special session for going through all those things as well. There is also the issue about communicating the results to the appropriate people. I think Kaushika raised that issue very strongly. I think in the past we have agreed that all the audits that are coming out, the reports are automatically given to either the cabinet member or chair of committee or the appropriate members, because it didn't always reach them. I understand that there are still some problems although you have implemented that system, on actually being respected. So I think we'd like to put that as something. And the final bit from this session is that this particular one, the procurement audit, it would be probably, I will ask in the end, summarizing that your report, that we agree to invite the head of procurement and probably the appropriate cabinet member, just to see how we're doing with that particular one, because it's of a particular concern. Yeah, Mark, just a final thing.
Chair, sorry, I didn't get an answer to my question around Homes for Haringey on the 3.11, the governance issue. And I just want to reiterate my suggestion. I think it'd be really good, because I think the concerns around here from this meeting from members, I think it'd be great for you to write to the chief executive. I just think it's a real opportune moment, because we can't kind of carry on like this. And I think, as I said, I think with a new person in charge, it's an opportunity. So I would make that suggestion again. I don't know if other members are in agreement with that.
Want to move on to well, we agree. I think that this is just a matter of recording it. Yeah, the next report.
Thank you, Chair. So the next report I bring to you is the annual governance statement for 21-22. Let me just do a quick introduction to this paper and then take any questions. I guess the overall aim of good governance is to ensure that any organisation, Haringey, that we apply our resources and direct them in accordance with our agreed policies and priorities, that we have sound decision making, and that there is clear accountability of our resources in order to deliver the outcomes that we wish. There is a framework for looking at our governance framework, and what that does is that it helps us think about how we attain our goals from the lens of sustainable economic, societal, and environmental outcomes, which I think is helpful. We have something called a CIPFA Solis model. This is a framework that was developed by CIPFA and Solis in 2016, and it has 7 principles and a number of sub-principles. And the intention is that an organization self-assesses itself against those principles and determines whether it feels it complies with them, and where it doesn't, it seeks to identify those and to try to put in place improvements so that those matters are in future applied. That is what's happened here. The paper you have in front of you has a sort of a context preamble to start with, and that sets the context in terms of what the last financial year was like and the sorts of things that the authority was trying to deal with. And then there's a section that has a number of points in a tabular form, which go through those 7 principles and the sub-principles to help understand whether we meet or don't meet those principles. And then there's a section at the end that identifies the significant governance issues where we believe improvements are necessary. Does that make sense before I go into the other?
Can I open it up to any questions or comments? Yes.
So just a comment. So in terms of the governance of the council, so have you identified any gaps within the governance? And what are they? And what measures are you going to put in place? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, paragraph 4.2 of the paper identifies the significant governance issues. I think they're on page, just bear with me 1 second. Pages, thank you, 114, 115. There are 6 significant governance issues. The first is that we must make sure that we live within our financial means. Finance colleagues have carried out quite a thorough review of the monies that we have and the likely grants that we'll receive in the future, and have come up with a medium-term financial plan that we will have to abide by to deliver our savings and to make sure that we service all our operations within that financial envelope. And that's going to be a challenge. So there's a first piece there. The second is around our processes for dealing with acquisitions and disposals. This committee has had many reports from me and discussed at length some of the issues around our internal control environment for making sure there is transparency in how we can demonstrate our acquisitions and disposal methods. The third is around children's services and our safeguarding of children. That is a significant governance issue. As you quite rightly say, we had an Ofsted report back in 2018, which identified some gaps. There have been more subsequent reviews which show an improvement in the journey, but we haven't got to a point where we can be completely satisfied that those improvements are. Yeah.
I just say that we've had a recent Ofsted report, and I was surprised that it wasn't more damning than it was, because that was the most recent one. Was I don't even think it's up to a year ago, about a year ago, we had a recent Ofsted report which looked at the delays of the educational healthcare plans for children with SEND, also delays in diagnosis of autism. And there's been significant reviews which the body has taken over, which used to be the CCG, now they're the Integrated Care Pathway. I know because I'm involved in them. And there were subsequent things which the parents and everyone else was saying prior to this, we were banging drums and saying, this is inadequate. It's not meeting our needs. Now, if you're not having an audit trail, how are you supposed to circumvent go in there and address the issues before it gets to Ofsted or before you get to frustrated parents pulling their hair out? And if we go back to child protection, I'm astounded that this has been deferred. And the reason being is we have had case after case in Haringey, and we need to do better.
So I think, Councillor, we agree. It is a significant governance issue, and it's been recognised as such as well. which is great. But just the next point is around the bringing back of the Elmo and the impact that will have on the council operations. So we have brought the Elmo back into our operations, but clearly that's going to cause management strain. It's not going to be business as usual within the council for those services that are absorbing all these what were Homes for Haringey operations. The fifth point is around the need to strengthen our information governance framework. This is to make sure that we've got robust arrangements to manage and show that we are taking all the steps we should to maintain personal data, to manage confidential data. And the final point is around health and safety. The auditors did some work around Homes for Haringey health and safety. Sorry, Councillor Jameson, are you finding it hard to hear me? That's fine. So we did audits around health and safety, Homes for Haringey as well as the council, and we've assigned those areas limited assurance because there are some areas we think that could be improved, and that's something else that's been added to the governance paper that you have. So there were the 6. Just answering your question, there were the 6 issues.
So, just going back to in relation to the controls and property acquisitions and transactions. So in the last committee, you talked about controls and have you started applying those controls, and has that actually filled those gaps? Could you please talk a bit more about those controls and provide a bit more insight?
So I'm aware that management have taken a number of steps where they've tried to reassure me as well as within the organisation, key stakeholders, that there is a clear audit trail as to why we make certain decisions. So there is more consultation, there is a stronger regime around our decision making. But again, I think it's probably inappropriate for me to comment on how those recommendations are being implemented, because my role is to identify and provide assurance or otherwise on the adequacy of our systems. It's probably better actually if, again, the head of the service or the AD for the service is able to comment on what those steps actually are.
I'm just trying to be helpful. I think Minesh has made a very good suggestion, because what used to happen in the past, I feel not sorry, but sympathy for him in terms of the questions that's been put to him as an auditor, in terms of all the various roles that he plays. What tends to happen, and the good suggestion, is that for the heads of service or the assistant director to come here and answer those questions in terms of why certain things are delayed or why, not being progressed in whatever way. Because you take a snapshot, you do your report, whether it's low, mid, or high assurance, they come up with, yeah, we'll do it by whatever time. You can't account, but they're providing you with reassurance. So what we've done in the past with benefits, with all the issues and the sale of what's it called, Homes for Haringey stuff, we've brought them in, something that the external auditor picked up. Some of these things are due to lack of resources. And when we provided resources to the department, the performance just went up. And so I think it would be good once where you are having difficulties with people or managers telling you, oh, well, we'll do it next year or in 6 months' time and it's not being done. Bring them here, as you suggest, in consultation with the chair, because if not, we'll be here all day. Then you can look at your, what is it called, the agenda in terms of what you put there, so that's not too much. So you have time to have discussions and stuff. It's a very good idea, and I don't think Minesh will be able to deal with all the issues that are being asked there, because he's not the one that is actually doing the job.
Have you completed your report, Ines, at the moment?
Yes, that's.
Thank you. So there is a general feeling about things that there are a few bits and pieces that need to be looked at. The governor's statement is a bit of a problem for people like me. There's quite a lot of bits on it. It's like something that is going on every year. It's been repeated and readjusted. But there are things that are missing, you know, very basic, but where do you start from? And there are some bits, some statements in it. For example, I'll pick up a statement in here that is said, try to remember, something about very few, very rarely decisions are made in secretly, like on the confidential part. Well, it is not quite accurate, you know, it's not my experience and things like this, but you can nitpick on a lot of stuff. But the broad picture is that we do have a mechanism at the moment, which external auditors seem to think that it is adequate in general. But we've got a number of issues. What I would suggest is that we keep on bringing that issue. They're gonna come the next one to the committee. We give councillors probably a bit more time, probably in advance, to read everything, to prepare possibilities of, you know, having a deeper say on it and so on. Yeah. And I think I would like to close, to note that report now and close it, unless there's something burning, please quickly. Yeah.
It's just a burning thing because you take the audit, but you do not make the overall decisions about what to prioritize. It is actually the heads of that department. That's how I understand it to be. And I was just thinking, Chair, if we can strategize and invite them here to answer those questions and perhaps put them on the agenda for the meeting, give them enough time to be able to prepare so that we just don't catch them on the hop.
Good suggestion. Now, the next item is, to a certain extent, complementary, if you like, on it, is the external assessment of our internal audit. Yeah.
Chair, sorry to have my light on for a while. I just wanted to very quickly ask a point of information about, you gave us 5 service improvements where there was, 5 areas where there were significant governance issues. I just wanted to know how we were going to, as a committee, have keep overall tabs on that. Will you be reporting back on those 5 areas at each committee meeting?
I'll bring an update for December. It's twice a year, so there'll be an update.
Can I ask then that we do have some kind of update on Homes for Haringey, because that's a significant risk, and I think waiting till December is not a great idea.
If the committee would wish me to bring a paper to the next meeting in September,
yeah,
I'm happy to do
I would
that.
ask for that.
Okay, let's minute it, yeah, and see how, you know, how.
Yep, happy to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Is it Mr. Gada? Yeah. Who's going to introduce the next one? Is it you, Mines, or, you know, welcome, Mr. Gada, as well. Thank you very much for joining us. Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening. Can I just do a very quick intro to the paper and then pass you over to Ray to speak to his report. The very quick introduction is that the paper you have is something that our standards require us to oblige me to do. Every year when I bring the annual report to you, I've reported that I believe internal audit complies with the best practice and the standards that we are required to abide by. And every 5 years, though, and that has to be tested, and it has to be tested by some external person to assess whether actually our standards are in compliance with those public sector internal standards. So Ray Gard is the assessor. He carried out an assessment of our internal audit functions, and his report is attached to this paper.
Over to you, Mr. Gard.
Thank you, Chair. I presume you've all had an opportunity to read through the report. when we carry out an assessment of an internal audit service, we carry out quite a comprehensive process. So we look at all the documents that the service uses, their methodologies, their working practices. We study the audit charter to see what's included in that, and we look at the annual report. And as part of the process, we review a sample of audit files to see if they're conforming to the standards. We also conduct some interviews with key stakeholders, and we use a survey as well to canvass the views of other people that we haven't had an opportunity to actually interview. As you can see from the report, we're saying that the internal audit service at Haringey fully conforms to the public sector internal audit standards and the local government application note, which adds a little bit more strength to the public sector internal audit standards for the local government sector. Primarily that's because in the other areas of the public sector, like health and central government, it's slightly more regulated than it is in local authorities. And local authorities internal audit, if you like, has much more of a free scope on what it looks at and what it does. In the central government and in the NHS, it's a bit more prescriptive. As part of this process, we looked at everything that was there, and we made an assessment against the self-assessment that Minesh had provided us with on what he feels is his conformance to those standards. We looked at all of the evidence that he had used to support his self-assessment, and we tested everything that we possibly could on those areas just to make sure that what he was actually saying is a true reflection. You can see from page 4 of my report, everything is green. They fully conform to every part of the public sector internal audit standards. And that is the mission statement, the 10 elements that's in the core principles, the 5 elements that are in the code of ethics, which also includes the 7 principles of public life, the 4 attribute standards, and the 6 performance standards. There are no areas at all where we're worried about the way the audit service operates, and we have not made any recommendations to improve their conformance to the standards. We have, however, made 4 suggestions, which are all advisory for Minesh to take into consideration. The first of those is just to make sure that in his annual report, he clearly states to everybody that there's not been any impairments to his independence or objectivity. Now, this is all set out quite clearly in the audit charter, but the audit charter is designed to look at the year coming up. So it's a forward-looking document, whereas the annual report reflects back on the year that's just finished. So it is quite important to actually say if there have been any issues for the year that's just finished. The next advisory point we've put in there is really around the arrangement that the council currently has with the Apex contract for internal audit that's managed by Croydon. This is really just a precautionary point, because at this stage, we don't actually know whether Croydon will renew their contract or indeed whether Mazars will wish to continue with the contract. And if it's left to 2024, when that contract expires, and we suddenly find then that they can't continue, excuse me, I'm losing my voice a little bit. If we find in 2024 that they can't continue, it's a bit late to find an alternative solution. So precautionary measures, really, it's around just making sure that you've looked at what the alternatives are and making sure that you've got a plan in place in case the worst case scenario happens. Excuse me. The last 2 points that we raised really is just about putting potential distribution lists for the final report onto the audit briefs that they produce, so people that are seeing the audit brief have got a good idea where this report's going to end up. And on the final report itself, putting that distribution list on there so that anybody reading the report knows who else has seen it. I think that's really all I wanted to say about the process. As I say, it's a good service that you've got operating at the moment, and you just need to maintain that going forward. But I'll be quite happy to take any questions on the process or my report.
Thank you very much indeed. Any questions or comments, people? Alessandra, who's first?
I'm sorry if there's a question I can't hear.
So the question I have is about the quality assurance and improvement programs, although this is an Haringey document, so I'm not sure if it's for the external auditor or if it's for Minesh. But I just wanted to understand exactly how this come about, because it's 1923, so it looks like it's a 4-year plan. I can see that we are at version 1, May 22, so I don't know if that's the versioning. And we have a series of actions, because effectively it's an improvement plan and a time scale. And I wonder if this is something that is reviewed every year and there is an update on the statuses on this program, how the plan is progressing and the improvement is progressing, or this is something that is done 2019 or 2022 and is valid for the 4 years, basically. Thanks.
Okay. So you're going to try to answer it.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Rossetti. So one of the things that the public sector internal audit standards say that must be in place is something called a Quality Assurance Improvement Plan, QAIP, and that's the document that you see there. The purpose of this document is to identify areas where the internal audit function can be improved. And it is an important document because it sets out the journey, which essentially is based on the sorts of things that I've identified with colleagues on what we think needs to improve. But it's also important because Ray, as the external assessor, would assess whether I am being honest and absolutely is my appraisal of what I think needs to be done over optimistic, as in it's got not a lot on it, or is it actually a fair representation of what we need to do? So what I've done is that I've shared this document in its entirety with this committee, so you can see the sorts of things that I've been adding to each year. And I've also taken on board Ray's advisory points and added those into that QAIP, so that we can manage and monitor that action plan and make sure that we address those issues, which I think are really important. Actually, discussing some of those points with Ray was quite helpful in the sense that it puts a little bit more perspective on sometimes, you know, the risk that actually we might find ourselves without an auditor come 2024 if we don't start to think about the contingency plan. That sort of discussion is really, really helpful. So that's already added to the plan. But in answering your question, Councillor, that QAIP has been with us ever since I started, which is why it's from 2019. Yes, these are actions that we've been working on for the last few years. Yes, yes.
And what is coming as well? Yeah. Any other questions? No. Can I just ask Mr. Gad? Thank you for your comments. Generally, your assessment, found it very useful, and the pieces of advice. It does give the impression that our internal audit operates reasonably well in comparison with other authorities. But I'll ask you a cheeky question. But in terms of, from your experience, you have worked with numerous authorities, obviously, on their internal audit sections. Would you recommend in London one or two that are better than us, and could be good if we look at them and discuss a bit with them?
I can't say that I've looked at every internal audit service in London. So it'd be very difficult for me to say that there are one or two that are, if you like, better in any way. Most of the internal audit services around the country have improved significantly since the introduction of the standards in 2013. There are one or two audit services around the country that are very good, and I can let Manesh know which services they are, but they operate a different model to you. They tend to have in-house teams and quite often fairly large teams, and you've got a completely outsourced service. So really, it's difficult to make comparisons in that respect. I mean, obviously, when you're looking at the model to make sure that you're going to be in a resilient position in 2024, one of the things you could consider is whether or not you want to continue with a fully outsourced service, or whether you feel that maybe a co-source service with some in-house staff and buying in some external service is a better model, or even moving to a fully in-house service. The only downside
you preempted more or less my second question, which was the reference that you had that there might be a risk that we may lose our Mazars or the mechanism and all that kind of thing. Whether your advice from your experience is that beefing up or building up with our internal capacity, it would be the proper way basically to respond, or the best way, or what other advice you can give us on that particular side, if instead of trying to find a replacement for Mazars, let's say in 2 years' time, we start now working towards building up our in-house capacity.
I think the key issue is what you want to get out of your internal audit service. If you want an audit provider that's just going to give you assurance on your controls and risk management governance frameworks, then the model you've got at the moment works really well, and Mazars are a very good internal audit provider. If you want to use your internal audit service so that they're more insightful and more proactive, and are working with management to help develop teams and processes and changing the way that everything works, then to get the most out of that, you need a lot of, if you like, knowledge about the organisation. By the sheer nature of it, using an external provider who are working for maybe 20, 30 different organisations, they are not going to have that detailed knowledge about your organisation. They may have some detailed knowledge about certain processes that you won't necessarily have, but quite often when you're changing processes and developing systems, it all revolves around that in-house knowledge that's key to making sure that it's effective. Certainly a number of organisations that had fully outsourced internal audit services have started to move towards co-sourcing arrangement and building up some form of in-house resources in there. The only problem that they have, and you will have, and everybody has got at the moment, there is a dire shortage of qualified and experienced internal auditors throughout the UK. So it won't be an easy task.
Very much. Charles, did you raise your hand? Did you want?
I don't want to prolong the meeting, Chair. I think the conversation, probably the question which you've asked, which is a very good one, should probably be dealt with elsewhere in terms of the conversation, because of insourcing you're talking about, and from what Mr. Gad has said, and unless you want to do a QP transfer through Mazars because of the knowledge, but it's going to be very difficult to start to set up a team in finance. Very good in-house, and what we've done in finance is send those experts to the departments, and they are working with them, and you can see in terms of the improvement in their in that. But maybe that's something you should consider for the future. So
I think what we registered that issue, that this is something that we need really to work with the officers and see how we follow it up. Basically, there is that risk, there is a potential solution. The other towards a stronger in-house model Whether it is the right one, we'll decide, but we'll go through. Is there any other comments or anything else? So we note the report. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Gadd. So hope to see you soon again. Yeah,
Okay.
and thank you for your advice.
Thank you for
Can I-
inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Can I just two reports? I have to really be careful if we could move on them as quickly as we can, just briefly, unless obviously there's some biggest problem. Yeah. So it's about the insurance arrangements. Yeah.
Thank you.
For the Homes for Harringay, ex-Homes for Harringay insurance.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just a very quick introduction to this paper. I wanted to highlight to this committee the change in how we are going to manage our financial insurable risks. With the Homes for Harringay operations coming back into the council, we've had to readjust and recalibrate the insurance arrangements, which were very different between the two sets of organisations. So we are going through that process now. And from the 1st of October, all the previous Homes for Harringay operations, which are now part of the council, will essentially operate under the regime that we've had in the council for managing our insurance-related risks. I'll just pause there in maintenance of brevity and take any questions if that's okay.
I just want to understand exactly what is changing. Maybe I got it completely wrong, but previously, if one Harringay was paying a premium aspect, it means that in my mind that the risk was an aspect, pay off insurance. I'm thinking about insurance for the. With the system as it will be from October, it means that if Harringay will pay directly, the risk on a set is on us. So it means not only that it has to be upfront pay for insurance, it means also probably be a need for additional for insurance, and that basically being an additional pay on our fee. Because the same way you will be doing home for items, you will be not like this.
All of that is right, yes. Just one point. The premium that was paid by Homes for Harringay would be substantially different to the premium that we would pay in the council for the privilege of transferring all their risk to the insurer. It's a bit like a car insurance. The higher your excess is, the lower your premiums. Because essentially Homes for Harringay had a policy where they had zero excess, i.e. all the liabilities sat with the insurer, their premiums were substantially higher than those of the council. So the regime we would want to establish is one where we don't pay any more than what we used to pay before, and use good risk management if we can to try to get better value.
I just ask a couple of questions. Actually, it's mainly because of I do want to register certain points as well publicly. First of all, the insurance section, where does it sit at the moment? Who's the head of insurance? It's you. Okay, that's absolutely right. Now, first of all, the cases with our council housing are numerous, probably more than the others. So if you start dealing with all the cases in your section, would you be able to cope with that workload? How much? I mean, you report in the report, you're indicating some increase in staffing, but is it that sufficient? There will be probably more than all the other cases that our insurance covers in the whole of the council, I think.
So we've done a bit of due diligence in this. We've contacted the insurers and obtained details of claims that they've had in the last 3 years. And we've tried to understand that to help us appraise us of the level of resource we think we will need to help manage those claims if we were to manage the insurance claims. And we think that actually with the what I've indicated in terms of the report, we think we should be able to do that comfortably.
Okay. Just quickly, the costs of the whole thing. There will be those that are relating to social housing, to the council housing, they will be allocated to the HRA and the others to the general fund, that's the remaining, yeah? So there will be a mechanism, or every particular case that your section is dealing with will be allocated here or there. You've got a reference here about integrating it with the other housing functions as well, which presumably that thing. And a question in my mind and to a number of other councillors is, are we opening again a way through which we transfer costs to the HRA from the general fund? And that is probably a question for UKC as well, because I know you got quite a good knowledge on that particular field. It is a concern always, and I want to make sure that it's not a backdoor again mechanism of passing to the tenants and to leaseholders and all that kind of thing.
So it's not.
Assurance.
Yes, no. So it's not. So essentially, this operation would largely was already HRA funded. So the insurance premium paid was HRA funded, and what we are setting up would be HRA funded. Any other claims which arise which are not HRA related that the insurance team deal with, and they would go through the current processes. There's no need for that to be treated as HRA or anything else. The insurance fund would be maintained independently between the different funding streams as they are now.
Okay. I think that mark my words that in a year's time I'll be demanding an audit of that. But any comments or anything like this? So we accept, the report as it stands. Okay, everybody happy? Thank you. The report after that is the skills training matrix. So let's deal with that as quickly as we can as well, although it's a very important aspect of it. Mines.
Just a very quick introduction. I'm acutely aware that colleagues, myself and others, have been providing some form of training material to members of the committee to help members appreciate the different roles that we all have and the sort of language that goes with the sort of work that we do. We've provided that material to you. This is your opportunity to identify to us what you think would you find helpful to understand in more detail. So what you have here is a matrix that just basically cobbled together that sets out the sorts of areas where I think would be of interest to you. And I'm asking all the members to look at that and comment on where they think their preference would be to get future training or anything else which is not necessarily in that matrix, but corporate committee related, of course, not anything else. Yeah.
Any questions or comments, Charles?
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah. Okay, so that fits with all the things that we're looking at as well about reviewing the whole process. Can I just say that the SIPFA advice, good practice advice and all that kind of thing puts a lot of emphasis, and not unreasonably, more than any other committees, about the importance of adequate training for the members of the committees in general. Now that is quite an important side of it, and I think we do need to put some effort, all of us, basically, to get better. The other bit, though, is that there is something I just want to mention here. When we compare our practices here with the good advice, if you like, good practice advice from SIPFA and everybody else, we seem to be ticking all the boxes except one that we're missing. I have discussed it with Mines, which is we should have one or two or more independent members, in this committee. We haven't, for some reason or the other, haven't had that time. Now, the audit of skills of the current members would be helpful as well. When we get to that, and I would suggest that we will start working on that very quickly, then when we get to that, to identify the type probably of skills that we want from outside to come in as well. Probably a couple of people, and if we identify that we're covering a lot of stuff, I mean, you heard already councillors, I think, Mary and we need to take that skills audit as serious as we can, partly for improving our own performance in general, but also for that particular purpose. And yes, Kausika, did you want to say something?
It's the first time I've heard such a suggestion, Isidora. So for me, it's interesting, obviously. I think corporate committee is about members taking an oversight on the rest of the council. So I think there is a sense of responsibility that we have, which is different to those, to the kind of responsibility if you're not really a member of a councillor would have. So I think there needs to be some thinking about that, and some very careful thinking, because it doesn't always add value. My experience of, for example, in overview and scrutiny, it doesn't always add value. Sometimes people have their own friends and best people they like, and there's a lot of all of that happens very quickly. So I'm mindful that it doesn't always add value. I think the bigger thing for me always is that we need to be better informed. If we need to have pre-meetings, I would prefer that. I would prefer us to have a decent meeting beforehand, so we're all clear about what we're asking for, understand things better. I would much prefer that than to have this idea of independent people, partly because my experience is not, I mean, it's great when Michelle spoke, but my experience of overview and scrutiny is it doesn't necessarily bring in any more expertise, really. And it just adds complications about a sense of responsibility. It is our responsibility as councillors to do our level best to look at what's happening in the council. And I think, you know, we're very lucky, Mr. Gianni, you make such an effort, you really do, to present the papers. And when we had the training, you were really clear about our responsibility. So I kind of feel like I don't want to go just like that, in that way. I think there's so much thinking to be done before we do.
You're absolutely right to raise the concerns about that particular side. Olga says that most authorities seem now to have in their audit committee somebody independent, and it is to be very strong. It is a strong advice from the SIPFA that we should have. Now, we have to decide in the end whether we do or we don't, and where we think so. But all I'm suggesting is we've got to start the process, because even if we don't go down that road, we've got to have a very good reason and demonstrate that we did examine it, and that's why we didn't do it. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Any other question? Charles, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, one thing that we did was provide SIPFA training for all members. That can be linked into this, you know, in terms of the training for this committee per se, in terms of the role of this committee. The SIPFA training aspect for all members, obviously, that comes under the cabinet member for finance, in terms of providing that understanding of the overall finance stuff. But in terms of our role on this committee, and your suggestion through SIPFA, if SIPFA is suggesting that that should be done in terms of independent persons on the panel, clearly you have to look at the council's constitution and governance. So so legal will need to be involved in that. So it's not just a case of bringing someone in. Yeah. So I just put that there. It's a brilliant idea. But
did you want? Thank you. Look, I think both comments are worthy, and just picking up on the chair's point about there being a transparent process. What's led to this discussion is that we have had a recent SIPFA publication, there is an application note, which essentially sets out what, from a good governance point of view, an ideal audit committee, corporate committee could look like, and its functions and its roles. Now, one thing that comes to my mind is that what we could perhaps do is appraise our current arrangements with what that advice is asking for. And if perhaps that comes to this next meeting, then we've got something to work from. So it's almost like, again, a self-appraisal of our operations with what's being suggested, and then we can consider that.
She's asking you to turn your mics on. When you're speaking, if you could turn your mic on. You have to tap it each time.
All right, so without that gives you enough to work on. I can encourage everybody, obviously, to make a special effort to fill that form. And I'm sure Mines won't mind if you give him a ring if you want to discuss a little bit, the details to make sure we get it right. Yeah, yeah. Am I all right on volunteering, Mines? Okay, thank you. Now the next item, I think, is the final item on the formal part, isn't it? Is the health, safety, and well-being policy. Andrew or Alexis, who's going to?
I'll ask Alexis to introduce the report in a moment. Just to for sort of clarification or complete clarity that the responsibility for the corporate health, safety, and well-being policy lies between Staffing and Remuneration Committee and this committee. This committee has responsibility for all health and safety matters other than those that are discharged in the council's capacity as an employer. So that's why it also goes to S&R for the employer side of it, and it did go there on the 27th of June prior to coming here. But so I'll hand over to Alexis to introduce the report.
Good evening. My name is Alexis Correa. I'm the Corporate Health and Safety Manager. We're bringing as Andrew has explained, the review of the corporate health, safety, and wellbeing policy to this committee as responsibility for everything else apart from for employees matter. So mainly related to building. The policy review includes changes in the health, safety, and wellbeing governance structure, and also accommodates delayed insourcing of homes for Haringey. We asked the committee to approve the draft of the policy, and also to authorize the chief executive officer, in consultation with the chair of this committee and the corporate health, safety, and wellbeing board. That also goes into the corporate leadership team to make such small amendments that doesn't grant a significant review to bring it back to this committee for review. However, those changes will be informed in this committee. The reasons for the decision are because the policy is in need of review, has to be reviewed every so often. There are several areas that have been reviewed. We've simplified management responsibilities. In lines of the change of the council, the governing council, we put that the reporting to the council leadership team is significant health and safety and well-being matters. Stating that the new role I have, which is corporate health and safety manager, supports the director of the customer transformation and resources that have very lately changed the name of the directorate. Can't remember the name of the directorate. We're supporting the director as the lead for corporate health and safety in the council. We have put clarification in building safety responsibilities. I've acknowledged the insourcing of Homes of Haringey to the council. A further revision of this policy may be required once the transitional period concludes and the organizational changes are implemented. And finally, the policy acknowledges the changes in governance, the membership of the Corporate Health Safety Wellbeing Board to ensure senior management accountability. It's clear that we cannot do anything, we cannot do nothing. We have to review the policy because it is a legal requirement to have a health safety policy, and we need to review it. And just to touch on the council statutory duties, the policy addresses the duties to plant and system at work, the maintenance of place of work, including exit and safe conditions, and the provision and maintenance of safe working equipment and adequate facilities.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Michelle?
Sorry about that. Or maybe I was too quick off the mark, but I just was looking at the thing, and I did look at it before, and there was no reference to the emotional well-being of the staff, because there seems to be an emphasis on the physical well-being. And the reason why I'm drawing this to the attention is that over the pandemic, the marginalized communities had a lot of stress, and Black and ethnic minorities felt the impact of COVID more than anybody else. And someone who works within mental health, I've seen a lot of, because I work in this borough as well in mental health, a lot of people coming through the system now that, you know, work for different organizations within Haringey, and their emotional well-being is not at the forefront of it. And then they creates work-related stress, high turnover of staff. So I'm just wondering, how can we implement that in here so it's explicit, and perhaps during, you know, the well-being of staff, whether it's in supervision or whatever you have in the policy, that is explicitly there for people to have that safeguard, because mental and physical well-being run tandem one with the other.
Thank you, Councillor. I absolutely agree with what you're saying. In the Staffing and Remuneration Committee, we presented the health and well-being strategy, which we will be taking forward, addressing specifically 4 areas of employees' well-being, which is mental well-being, physical well-being, economic well-being, and social well-being, connecting with communities. And that strategy has been now approved, and we are developing now the tools that how we can support employees in the mental well-being. And that was presented to the Staffing and Remuneration Committee because it deals with staffing matters.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I was going to suggest to Councillor Southwell that maybe the report, because everything you've talked about, that's been presented to a different committee. It doesn't cover this committee, which is what the officer said. Maybe that report that you've written that's gone to Staffing and Remuneration Committee, they have remit for all the stuff you've talked about. You could send her a copy of your report that deals with that area.
Thank you. That would be really helpful for me, because even if it was an appendix, it would have made me realize that they're working together, because as in isolation, it just looks like we're doing kind of box standard work, and we have to, you know, we have to evolve with the needs of the community as it changes. No one knew the pandemic would have happened. Well, I didn't anyway.
But mind you, there is a cross-fertilization. The two you see about every time the bloody lifts break here and in the other places, so the toilets break down on the Tottenham Leisure Centre and other kind of thing. God knows what got on the mental well-being. But having said that, we take the side, and this a fine line on this particular area, or working together between Staffing and Remuneration in this committee, looking at the two sides together. Yeah. Is there anything else on this? Oh, sorry, Mary.
Thank you. Mine was it's a follow-on question, actually. It was a similar question, which was about equality's impact and how you are going to ensure that that is addressed within the corporate health and safety and wellbeing. I know you've put that into the background information, the report itself, but it's very shallow. And so I think that if you are looking at the health and safety, corporate health and safety and wellbeing policy, we do have to make sure that we're addressing the different areas of discrimination, which are clearly we've accepted has got a large impact, but the actual policy is very weak on it.
The policy is based on gives answer to the Health and Safety at Work Act. It goes into the health and safety and welfare of employees, with covers well-being. And the way that we ensure that we are considering equalities in there is that when we are revising the health and safety governance structure of the council with their policies and procedures, they have the different areas in the council comment on it and make suggestions of the different areas of the council that may have to be they need to be considered in those procedures to take into account the different equalities that we may have. And we're in close communication with HR when we consult with the wider consultation on the health and safety management system. And always our trade unions colleagues are commenting and are involved in the development of the health and safety management system.
Yeah, I've got about 1,000 questions to ask, but I won't do that now. Yeah, I'd really like to see what kind of ways in which staff from different groups, how they are supported in terms of health and safety and wellbeing. So I don't know if there's any other information you could send. That would be really helpful.
I think a lot of the questions that you're asking also relate to the wellbeing strategy that Councillor Simmons-Saffo asked for, and we're really happy to send you a copy of that as well. And it does make, I think, you know, there's probably much more in that strategy about how we're taking account of equalities issues. You're absolutely right that you know that there's a big crossover between, you know, kind of wellbeing issues and inequalities. We fully recognise that, and I think particularly for our lower paid staff, that's a particularly significant issue. So we're very happy to share that with you.
Thank you very much.
Quick one, and just to be helpful, if there is a document, which is what my colleague is asking for, the quality impact assessment document, which you've discussed with HR, as you say, that should help if you put a little bit that say, well, you've done that, you've discussed it, and the document is available. You don't necessarily need to attach it to this, because members won't have, well, not all members will have time to read it, but you did mention it, but there's nothing there. So that's why the question was asked. So maybe in the future, you just say, well, we've done all this, we've done all that. The quality impact assessment covers everything, which is a question that's been asked. Helpful, I think.
Thank you.
For future, and you're going to send it to them, to interested members.
Thanks.
Okay, so in broad terms, what we've seen in front of us, are we endorsing it? Yeah, yeah, and we're also asked to authorize the chief executive in consultation with the chair of the committee, etc., if there are some minor adjustments. Okay, thank you very much. New items of urgent business. Have we got anything? No, nothing. Now we've got the dates of future meetings here with an indication of what we know already that will be on that agenda. Yeah, on each agenda, basically, the ones that they're already scheduled, if you like, the dates, and I think that helps a bit to plan the whole thing. Can I just add to the fact that we're gonna be having a standard report on all the committee meetings about decisions, committee decisions, and where they are, where we are with them. Have they been implemented or not implemented, etc. As a kind of a rolling thing, always all the action points and so on. You know, that will be at every meeting going back, and it will only be taken off that list when they have been completed, or there have been a good reason not to take them off. But otherwise, none should really be forgotten. The last bit on that issue, I wanted to say, I don't know what the feedback is from especially the new councillors who came at 6 o'clock for that pre-meeting and the whole thing, and hopefully you found it very, useful at least to start lifting a bit the veil on things like this. And would members be happy to have at every meeting something before like that on particular subject? And if it is, yeah, I noticed so, but yeah, generally, if it is, I noticed that on the audit plan and other things, people wanted to talk a lot more about, because there are numerous bits, etc., but also about how things are getting onto the audit plan, all that kind of thing. What can we do? How we follow it up? Would that be probably a good subject, or would people want to suggest for the next meeting to have 6 to 7, are they always on Thursday?
Yeah, it's just that I have my counsellor's surgery on a Thursday every other week, so I'd have to double check.
Oh, so, all right, yeah.
And that's from 6 till 6:30 to 7:30.
Well timed.
I know, exactly.
Well, that's a pity.
And I can double check the dates and perhaps let Jack know.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
let's discuss it. So is there any suggestion? I mean, I mentioned we do something about the audit plan and all that kind of thing, but it might be that people will be more interested on something else at this stage. Is there any suggestions? You would like to get the chance to have a bit more of a, getting the teeth in as part of a training, let's call it that way.
Training's different. Maybe it's different chair.
Well, it is. We use it as a training, illustrated straight away with a report that we'll be discussing that night in the, afterwards. That's how we used it. But whether it was. Why not? So we agree that. Yeah, if you have any ideas, please, yes, send it to Jack. Yeah, so that they can do it. I think that should be concluding all the business, isn't it? Is everybody okay? Yeah. Thank you very much. We didn't do badly for the first meeting of the session. Okay. Thank you. Cheers.